I am introducing the Reverend Stuart Wright and the Reverend Robin Litton from the Synod and from the Diocese on either side of me here respectively. And they're going to talk about what the call process is going forward and answer any questions that you may have about that call process, or, as I kind of threw them under the bus during announcements at the 8 o'clock service, if we run out of questions about the call process, if you have questions about the diocese or the synod, I'm gonna let them answer them. So, I don't know who wants the microphone first. There you go.
I'll go first because Robin's got a joke for us, I'm just sure. Again, Stuart Wright, I'm the canon for transitions, which is the reason that I'm here today, but I also do human resources for the diocese. And it's a treat to be with the congregation here. Robin and I met with your vestry a month or so ago. A good month ago. And time has flown and I am a blur. But we are delighted to be with you, and I will encourage you.
So I am Robin Simpson Litton, the assistant to the bishop. On the Easton Diocese, I am known as Canon Robin. Yes, Patrick, before he left, canonized me. Because I said, sometimes people think assistant to the bishop is sort of like, his assistant, right? But it's actually, I do the mobility process, the call process, and that's what brings me here. I also am the staff person for candidacy, and so I get to see our leaders from soup to nuts. From the very first time they say, I'm feeling a little nudge from the Holy Spirit, I'm that first conversation. And then I continue with them all the way to installation when I kick them out of the nest and say, you are on your own. I also do shared ministry, which is becoming a lot more, I wanted to say value, but that's not true. So many of our churches now have decided that working together is a good thing. Amen? And it took some to get on this side of COVID. And so we're doing a lot of shared ministry, and it does come in a variety of ways. 1, 2, 3, 4, we have 5 churches in one parish, and we continue to do that. And the beauty is, and this is where why we're here today, the beauty is we have this wonderful relationship with the Episcopals. And I say, this is how proud I am of us. Pastor Stuart and I can talk. In many other judicatories, we have to talk to the bishop. The bishops talk together. You know how that goes. But because we have such a great relationship, our bishops have said, hey, you guys do the work. You guys can talk, and you guys can do what you need to do. And so that just goes to show you how close our relationship really is. So that's why we're here today.
So when I first came on doing this work 15, 16 years ago, we didn't have any churches that were sharing, period. And what I found was that among the Episcopalians at least, we can't talk to those people over there at that other church about possibly sharing a church because they're the competition. That was true what they said about their fellow Episcopalians. But if we started talking about the Lutherans, well, that was perfectly fine. They were more than happy to enter into a relationship with the Lutherans because they weren't seen as the competition, or those are the people who were the workers and we were the management, or those were the people who were so conservative and we're so liberal, or something like that. So it was so much easier to get conversations started between small Episcopal churches and small Lutheran churches. And our relationships have just grown over the years through our great, great delights. So thank you for that.
So I will talk to you a little bit about the call process. I will also tell you that this is still new. We don't have 100 years under us yet. And so Stuart and I will be working hand in glove together. And that's really a blessing, I think, as we go through this call process. so that both judicatories are honored and fill what is their constitutions and agreements and everything. So I look forward to us moving ahead. Just to give you a few highlights and to catch you up, Pastor Kathleen has an LOA.
Letter of agreement.
Thank you. For 2 years, and her first year is in August. She will have completed her first year in August, so she has 1 more year for the agreement. So starting about in the fall, I will be grabbing your counsel once again, along with Stuart, and starting to talk about the call process. The first thing that we will be doing is constituting a call committee. And that we will talk to council on how that's done and what the process for that is. After we do that, the first thing that call committee will do is work on a survey. It is really important for the call committee and for us to understand where you are now. No church is the same as before COVID. And everybody is in a different place now. And you're looking for a pastor priest now. So that survey will be given to everybody, and we want everybody to answer, because we want everybody's ideas, opinions, thought processes, everything. Because the more you do that kind of work, the better it allows us when we start bringing new candidates, doing matchmaking, those kinds of things. And it gives you a sense of who you are as a church. If this church closed, here's the big question. If this church closed, what would this community miss? What would you miss? It's a really good question to keep in your mind. Why are you distinct? What makes this church the church that you got up early to come to? Why is this that church? And that's what we'll be mining for and thinking about. Now, we're going to be doing things sort of a little double, because why not get the best bang for our buck, right? So Stuart will be doing his stuff, and I will be doing my paperwork and my stuff. And for the Lutherans, and I'll let Stuart explain his side, you will be putting together what you call a ministry site profile, an MSP. And again, that is about your church. And it asks lots of questions. It asks some about geography. It asks some about we are more like this than we are like this. It'll ask, what do you want in your next pastor priest? Those kinds of questions. So it really is the heart, the DNA of what this church is about.
And as often said, the Episcopalians have something that's similar but different, of course. And ours is called the Office for Transition Ministry, OTM, Portfolio. And the idea for this is it's the online dating service. It's sort of an e-harmony kind of thing. So that all of the clergy out there who are thinking about applying to come to Baltimore would be able to find out who is it that you folks say that you are at this time. And our questions are lots of narrative questions, essay questions, and they deal with things like, what is your experience of stewardship? What is your experience of conflict in your congregation? What is your experience of reaching out to your community? And at the same time, any Episcopal priest who is thinking about coming here will also be answering those same questions. What is my experience of stewardship? What is my experience of conflict in churches and so on? So that when your search committee and the church council are looking at all of the finalists, they'll be able to say, who is it that answered these questions in a way that seems most advantageous for us at this point in our church's history? I have a question for Neil. When Stuart Lucas was initially called as priest in charge, was there any of the survey kind of stuff? I don't remember that, but I was just coming on at that same time. So it's really helpful, because y'all didn't do this when Stuart came, and you certainly didn't do it when Holy Comforter came from down the street. So I think to do these survey kinds of things is going to be really helpful for this relatively newly combined congregation to say, who is it that we are in 2024 as we go forward as a new community that is completely different than at the time that the two churches came together, or when Stuart was called as priest in charge 14, 15 years ago, whatever it was.
9,
9?
I think, 9 or 10.
Wow. My timeline is a complete blur in my brain. So there it is. So being able to do all of that is really helpful. But the two processes, the council talked about doing both the Lutheran version as well as the Episcopal version, just so that any Lutheran pastor or Episcopal priest would have sort of familiar ground to be able to assess whether this feels like a good call to them in this point of their ministry history.
And so that means that you are so lucky, because you get not only the plethora of all the Lutheran possibilities, but the plethora of all the Episcopal possibilities. So you really have the full gamut for that. So the next step after you put that together is that Stuart and I do play matchmaker, and we also, anybody who comes to us and says, you know what, I'm feeling this nudge that I'd like to be a candidate. We will, of course, check and make sure that they are of good standing, have followed all the right things, but then we would put them possibly on the slate. But as we're doing the matchmaking, the one thing that we have agreed on is that Pastor Priest Kathleen will first, if she discerns at that point that the Holy Spirit has nudged her and she feels like she would like to be a candidate, she will be the first one interviewed. She'll be the first one interviewed. The call committee will give an up or down vote. Up or down. The call committee needs unanimous consent. That means everybody on the call committee says, we can see that. We can see those gifts in her. And yes, we think this needs to be moved forward. If she gets that consent, she goes to the council. The council, she needs a 3/4 vote, and then it goes to the congregation. The congregation will vote, so you have the last vote on everything that we're doing. And the congregation needs a 2/3 vote. That is according to your constitution on the Lutheran end.
And for those of you who come from the Episcopal tradition, you will see that that is different. But that is because in the Episcopal world, it's only the vestry that gets to elect the new priest. But for what was it called? The agreement between the two Federation agreement. According to the Federation agreement, it's the Lutheran system that is being used, so the congregation does get a vote. We had not talked about that in advance of our vestry meeting, and I had missed that in looking at the Federation documents. And so I'm sitting there with this huge twitch in my neck, but I was quickly shown exactly chapter and verse that that's what this community had agreed on. So that's the process that we will be using. And it's really helpful to have worked through all of that in advance so that we're not having arguments when we're in the middle of a call process. Working all of that out in advance was hugely, hugely helpful to be able to say, this is the way that we are going to do it here.
Yeah, we've spent a lot of time talking to each other going, it says in here this, and your document says this, and what does this mean? So I think we have a clear path forward. So Pastor Shadow, if she feels the stir of the Holy Spirit, will interview first and go through that process. If she is a yes all the way through the process, she is your next pastor priest called here. If she discerns that she does not want to be a candidate here, that God's calling her somewhere else, then both Stuart and I will do our matchmaking and put together a slate of candidates. And then we will present that slate to the call committee. The call committee will do their interviewing, And then the same thing happens. You need unanimous consent, then it goes to council for 3/4, and then it goes to the congregation for 2/3. Yes, sir.
Pastor Robin, you keep referring to a call committee. Who is it and what is it? How does it operate?
We will talk about that at council. It's usually constituted through council. So council usually are the ones, sometimes it is the president of the council that nominates, but usually it's the council that comes together and chooses. And usually it's 6 people on a call committee.
And it's really helpful if it's not just members of the council, but rather from a broad selection of the congregation so that everybody will feel like they have some buy-in. Yes, James?
Now, sir, what if the congregation do more than 2/3 of a vote?
James asked, what if the congregation has more than 2/3 of the vote? That is wonderful. Hooray, hallelujah. We are very pleased.
Okay.
One thing that I think I need to be the naysayer here is that at least on the Episcopal side of the world, and I think it's true for the Lutherans as well, there's a clergy shortage. And so it's really a good thing that this Lutheran Paleogen congregation can draw from clergy from both the Lutheran and the Episcopal sides of the world, because even our biggest churches in the Diocese of Maryland are lucky if they get 2 candidates. It's really that bad out there right now. And so being able to have a pot that includes both Lutheran pastors and Episcopal priests is going to give the search committee and the council a lot more of a feeling of we had some choices.
Anything else? Yes.
Just to deal with circumstances, let's say Kathleen offers herself after she says, yes, I want to try this. She goes through and at some stage, I don't know whether it's at council or whether it's the congregation, she doesn't get that vote. Does she then go into the general pool again?
So let me talk about the church, and then I will hand that since she is on the Episcopal side. But the church then would offer her to stay as a bridge interim if she would like, and so she could stay here. If not, we would look at putting a bridge interim in place if she would choose to go somewhere.
Ditto. That would be the Episcopal version as well. That the priest in charge, if they are not selected to be the rector, may stay on as an interim, but honest to Pete, I don't think I've ever seen it actually happen, because usually they say, it's time for me to go on. But
That's really not my question. My question was more about Kathleen is our primary choice right now because she's going to be the first one to be looked at. But if there's no comparison,
right, that's
the congregation just wants 1, 2 other people to compare with, she can still stay in the pool, right?
no.
She can't.
She cannot.
Either take her or we don't.
Here's the rationale to that, because I understand that. The rationale to that is that you want an even playing field. And she's been here for what will be close to 2 years, or will be 2 years. And so remember, in the call process, this is really important to understand. You are not looking for the best. You are looking for the match.
Right.
Who has God called to this congregation before we even knew it? And so we'll be talking about deep listening. I'll be spending time in the company doing this deep listening for what has God called. So you're looking for the match of gifts and talents. So it is not fair, and we won't have pastor or priests apply if Pastor Shadow is on the slate, because that's an uneven playing field.
I get it.
Right, for them. And so, she interviews fully if she chooses, and that's why, is she the fit? Is she the one God has called us to? And then that's that discernment process that you are a part
It
of.
knocks her out of the group that we consider once she goes through that first vetting.
When she goes through the first vetting, it's either an up or a down.
Right.
Uh-huh.
But she cannot be in the candidacy after that.
She cannot, right, she cannot be in the slate. Yeah.
I just think, thank you so much.
Yeah, and I mean, some ways to look at it, she has an advantage, she's here. And then in some ways, you know, you also know her foibles too, because, you know, you've been here for 2 years. So you know, I think there are blessings and curses on both sides, but that's the way to process.
Among her foibles was asking me to be the celebrant, since I'm the guy who's the world's worst with microphones at the altar. What was she thinking?
So a priest, and a pastor. Talking about jokes earlier. Anybody else have any questions, concerns, anything you'd like to bring up?
Kind of following up on Jody's question. People ask me, how am I doing? And I'll say, compared to what? And it's kind of what I think Jody is asking. We have Kathleen, we love Kathleen, but we don't know if there is someone else that we would love just as much or maybe even more, or fits into where we think we're going better than what we have with the status quo. So again, you have your hands tied. You say it's a unfair advantage for Pastor Kathleen. You could say it the other way.
That's what I'm saying, it's a blessing and a curse. I mean, I would say something about your doctor. Let's just your doctor. Do you go to 20 doctors and then pick the best one out sometimes? No, we usually go to a doctor that's well accredited, you know, passes everything, is in good standing, and then we like, right? And that we like process, that is that matchmaking process. But the deeper conviction is it's God who is doing the work here, and we are listening to who God has called here. And so that's part of this whole process of discernment, is listening for who God is calling here. And sometimes we're shocked. Sometimes they are right in front of us, and sometimes they are not. I've done 3 slates of candidates. That was a struggle. But at some point, and here's what I'm going to promise you. And Linda, you can hold me to it. Because I so have seen this process work, that by the time you have called that person, you will know that it's a gift from God. You will know that it's not just HR for God, but that there is something working there with the Holy Spirit on calling that next person here. And that's where the blessings and curses, the foibles and the gifts all come together. But it really, really does work. It causes you, though, to be in deep prayer, deep discernment, because ultimately, you know, because you are doing it on our side, that has that extra piece to it, everybody will have that vote. That means everybody had better be praying really hard. And I can guarantee you, Pastor Kathleen is praying really hard too. But her prayer is, God, what do you want me to do next? And that's your prayer. God, who do you want us to call next?
But the thing is, we don't know who else is running. If we're just interviewing Kathleen, don't misunderstand, but we're sort of blindsided.
So there was an alternative process that was not chosen initially, which would have been to have somebody be your interim pastor who would not have been a candidate. And during that process, then you would have had a slate. But when the interim can't be the final candidate or one of the final candidates, that's a whole different process. And so the synod, the diocese, and the council agreed that this was the way we wanted to go, was with the priest in charge that you had. So it is a different process. But I think that trusting the Spirit, knowing that you've been this route before, because Stuart Lucas was also a priest in charge, and it was the same process for when he was called as well to be your rector after a couple of years.
I think maybe making that distinction between the two, that not everybody understands the difference.
And it's tricky. I mean, all of the church stuff is weird. I mentioned earlier that I do human resources, and so that means that I'm trying to constantly use the right word when I'm talking about a hiring of a parish secretary versus the calling of a priest. And the call process for a priest is gigantically different than the hiring process for a parish administrator. So to be able to know that this is a similar kind of a different way of looking at things, that what we're working on is, because we're using the priest in charge and not the interim, we won't have a slate until you have decided that you don't want the priest in charge to be your rector. But that's step one, is yes or no, up or down. Is Kathleen as priest in charge to be the new rector, or will it be somebody else? And if it's somebody else, it's not Kathleen even as a possibility after that. After the no happens, either from her, or from the council, or from the congregation, then it's done for Kathleen. And this is not some weird Luther Palian thing. This is something that we have to have
And
before.
it's in your constitutions.
Wanted to ask, would it is with Kathleen, is the vote 2/3 vote again?
So it would come out of call committee being unanimous consent. Council would need 3/4, and then the congregation would need 2/3.
And the preemptive vote is the congregation, right?
The first vote is the
Call committee.
congregation's
Yeah, but
last.
let's say it gets through the call, it gets through the council, but it doesn't get through the congregation.
Then it's done.
Any one of those steps would stop it.
Yes.
And then what happens?
Then we go to putting a slate together.
As you're taking notes for the future, you might consider the other approach that the Lutheran side has done in the past, and that is having a 1, 2, 3 year term call.
In some ways, this is the same process, actually. She will have been here for 2 years, and then she will be allowed to interview. So that really, this is the Lutheran version of a term call.
Not really, because under the Episcopal way of doing it, the interim way of doing it, an interim can't be considered a candidate, but
Correct.
a term call could be.
Right, and for us, it's called a priest in charge, and the priest in charge is the same as the term call.
Right. And so she has an LOA of serving 2 years as priest in charge. And that's why she can then interview.
Yes, sir.
Is this a new or old person?
These are ongoing processes for both the Lutherans and the Episcopalians. We've done this for years. This is not new.
Right. And we're honoring your constitutions and all of your federation paperwork. This is all about honoring your process that has been set out, with some merging together as we talk to move forward.
But as to the question whether this is new, I would give you Stuart Lucas as the example. We did this with Stuart as well.
But the process with Stuart was entirely Episcopal, not Lutheran.
That's true. That was before the Federation.
Those darn Lutherans.
If only to get off the street sooner.
What's that?
I would say, for the Lutheran side, Pastor Biden was the term. So we also did a term process.
For Holy Comforter. Yeah. Pastor Isaac.
Yes, please.
This is a minor point, and I'll probably get in trouble, but,
Grace.
what's the definition of the congregation to whom you're going to send these forms? Because we seem to have kind of a loose thing about who's a member and who's not.
Thanks for giving me a heads up. As the call committee is doing its work, the council also has some jobs to do. One of those jobs is to make sure that you have a good, solid membership list according, again, to your constitution, your federation, with all the paperwork, what it says. So that will be something that I'll talk to the council about to make sure they're doing that work together.
I think that's been tricky under the best of circumstances, but I think after COVID, it's become even trickier. So I think you raise a really good point, and making sure that we're doing everything according to oil, but also having everything cleaned up.
And this is the time to do that cleaning up. Yes, ma'am?
So I would like to encourage another prayer that you all have for you and that you're encouraging us to have for us, so that we are all praying in the same accord. It is not enough to just pray for discernment. If that was the case, the Bible would say that's all we need to pray for, but it doesn't say that. The Bible makes it very clear. Sometimes you need to pray that you don't get in the way. Sometimes you need to pray that the enemy does not step in the process. We need a bigger prayer process. We are Christians, and we know the power of prayer, but if we don't exercise the full power of it, we're gonna be in a situation where it's like, there was a different blessing prepared for us, but people got in the way. I love that you said we need to put God first. And actually, I have a question. What is the diocese and the synod struggling to put God first with? Because I want to know that, especially since it might impact our process.
So, I want first for you to know that we do pray for all of our churches weekly. We go through the whole cycle of all of our 100 churches. Is that 200?
186.
186. We started at 115, I think, when I started. So we do pray for all of our churches regularly. All of us pray for Thy will be done, because it is a heck of a lot more than just praying about the call process. As one who has a peculiar focus on call, that ends up being my prayer, of course. But you're right, of course, we need to be praying for everyone. What our diocese is going through is a transition from one bishop to another. So that's a lot of our focus right now. Is we just said goodbye. Well, this week we'll say goodbye to Bishop Elof on the 1st of July. My friend, Carrie Schofield Broadbent, will be our new bishop-elect, getting paid, although she doesn't become officially a bishop until consecration in September. But lots of transition happening in our world. Quite honestly, we still have the old issues around the Heather Cook, who was the Bishop Suffragan for the Diocese of Maryland and who sadly killed Tom. So I can't tell you how many times that comes up for us. And it's been all these years, and yet we continue to live with this. And I'm convinced that we will for at least a generation. And so, some horrible tragedy like that doesn't just go away when the former bishop moves to the other side of the bay. We continue to deal with that. So we have a lot on our plate, and thank you for your prayers for all of us. Thank you.
We don't have the kind of transition that you're going through now. Our bishop has 5 more years. It's a 6-year term. He made me promise I'd stay on, so there's consistency. And so that is wonderful, because the church is everything but not consistent right now. There's just a lot of who's coming back. What does the church look like now? What did we waste our time focusing on, and what should we be focusing on now? And so we're doing a lot of that kind of work. I am doing, when I joined the bishop's staff, there was no shared ministry conversation. We had a couple, and they were the outliers, but now I have over 40 churches in shared ministry out of 186, and going strong. And so churches now are saying, let's talk to each other, wherever that may be. I mean, in Salisbury, Maryland, there was a little tiny Lutheran church that it was important for them to stay open. And St. Albans Episcopal, and they formed a partnership, and they've called a pastor. So shared ministry is huge right now for us. Our youth and family programs are always really important. We do struggle. I want to say we don't struggle as hard, but I'm scared to say that because then it'll come back on me. Transition, I think, has slowed down a bit. It used to be crazy, and I think it's starting to slow down a little bit, which is, I think, a good thing. I think people are finding their equilibrium again. So I think that's really what's happening in the Lutheran Church. We're also, we put a lot of emphasis on new starts, and new starts in non-traditional places. North Avenue Mission being the first one. It was the only new start in the Lutheran and the ELCA during COVID. But it came out of a need, and our leaders stepped forward.
What we have to face post-pandemic is, what's the new normal? We're still determining that.
And you know, I can be one to be like, oh, it used to be like, but I'm going to tell you, as somebody that's very blessed to get to go to other churches, I am amazed at ministries that are happening that would have never happened. Let me give you a good example. When I got ordained, my grandmother was in Augsburg Lutheran Village. I don't know if y'all know where that is. It's been around forever. And Grandma was there. And do you know she never saw me once preach? Never once. Because we didn't have Zoom. We didn't have Zoom back then. We didn't have technology back then. And so now I think that somebody's grandma can watch, you know, their granddaughter, grandson preach, or their service. My husband, being a pastor, he had a student move to Great Britain during COVID, and she was really isolated. She had to leave her apartment. Just imagine being, 18 years old and you're in another country. Every week she got to, sign on and see the service. And then on Thursdays, they would have a kind of meet and greet on Zoom, and she would talk to them. I mean, there are some real blessings that we have moved on with. And so I am kind of excited about being church, folks. I'm kind of excited because I think we're doing the work that God's called. We're not the social club anymore. And I think far too long we were feeling like the social club. And now we're putting God first. And we're saying, Jesus, you are at the center of our lives. And when we do that, this is a preview for my sermon. And when we do that, all things are going to be okay.
Pastor Stuart mentioned Heather Cook. We all watched with alarm and discussed what was happening with the Roman Catholic Church. What are either synod or diocese doing to make sure that we don't have similar?
I'll start, then I'll let you in. Because I might be faster, I don't know. What are we doing? There is no chance. There's not like a second chance. There's not like a, oops. There's none of that. If we hear that there has been a misconduct, we go right away. Our bishop does not mess around. And it's been hard on him. But there can be no room for misconduct in the church. And we are blatantly clear that there is that history that we are working with. That's number one. The second thing that we're doing actually is we're really making sure that our records are completely up to date, in the fold. Everybody is accountable for everything. You can go in anybody's folder and see what's in there at any time.
With regard to sexual misconduct among the clergy, the Attorney General's report in the state of Maryland has unearthed lots of stuff for everybody. Obviously, the Roman Catholics have lots of people there, but we have a handful ourselves. And so, in the past month or so, we've had somebody come forward who said that this priest, now deceased, abused me when I was 11 years old. And so we can't do anything about that because the priest is deceased. All of our disciplinary process is based on the assumption that we can actually go after somebody. But when somebody's dead, all we can do is try to be the best pastors that we can to the person who was so terribly abused all those many, many years ago. But it's been really hard, and God bless the people who were able to tell their truths and come forward. And all we can do as a church is try to be the best church we can for them in this time. But we didn't know back in 1972 what we know now. So, but with regard to going forward, both communions do background checks on everybody. We have trainings about our expectations with regard to misconduct. Boundary trainings over and over again, and it's not a once and done thing that we have to do it repeatedly. So we try to stay on top of that. But that's true not only for our clergy, but for all of our lay employees as well. And vestries and so on have to go through that kind of training. Yes?
Just a question about the process of Pastor Kathleen chooses to stay and go through the process, and that process would be the complete process, answering all the surveys and all the questions that we put forth. And you know, it's not a shorter process, right? It would be that we get to see all the answers to the questions we would put forth in the surveys.
I think they're great learning tools, so you betcha. Sorry. Yeah, I think they are great learning tools. So the survey, the ministry site profile, I would hope that you would share it with your congregation so that you can see where are the gifts, where are the talents, what's going on here, what are the shifts that you didn't have before. So yes, but all of that's done before, and if Pastor Kathleen decides that she wants to move forward, all of that will still be done.
And she would answer. So
She's going to have to do her version of, what is it again?
Office for Transition Ministry Portfolio, horrible words.
There you go.
It's essentially from swearing.
Office for Transition Ministry Portfolio.
I've seen them many times, I just couldn't remember the acronym for it. Yes. So there's no shortcut. We're doing the process. We are doing the process. And I just love your idea. I think, I mean, here's what I would like to say. That's a great council thing, to go back and say, how can we maybe make this a year of prayer? One thing that I did in a congregation was I made a covenant agreement with our congregation. And it wasn't about the call process, but it was a different thing. But we're going to pray for this, we're going to do this, we all agree to be, we're going to show up because we know we need to be together. Those kinds of things. And then everybody signed the covenant, we put it up on the wall. I mean, that could be a good idea.
What else?
What role do either one of you play in negotiating the call contract?
Both of us.
Both of us,
And the bishops.
we also have templates for the letters of agreement. And so this is the standard, and then after that, things can be negotiated. For instance, we didn't used to have cell phones in our template. And what we said was that all of the priests needed to share their telephone number with the congregation. But these days, everybody should have a cell phone. And so the question is, does the congregation pay for the data or not? That's a negotiable. But for all of the standard stuff in the letter of agreement, it would definitely be there.
And whoever is your next pastor priest would get the benefit of both judicatories. So they get the blessing of going to Synod Assembly for the Lutherans, and they get the benefit of your
Diocesan Convention.
Diocesan Convention. And truly, this is a blessing. You get resources for both. And so you guys are really lucky in that.
but what we don't do is make them good at every blooming possibility. So we have a program called Fresh Start that is for priests who are leaving their ministry, and yours is called
First call.
First Call. What we always told folks is pick one or the other, but we're not going to ask you to go to both of them because that's just, you know, a ministry of meetings and meetings and meetings.
It would be mean. It would be mean.
Mean,
To make
yes.
me go to vote.
Yes, it would be cruel.
Come on.
But you still require 2 parochial reports.
No, well, yes,
There is that.
yes, but everything is, we don't have to split things anymore. It's all the numbers are reported on both, except for the fact that they ask it in different ways.
And the parochial reports are not just the purview of the clergy, but should also be done at the lay leadership as well. Although I'm not that naive.
And it is whatever supports, you know, let's just, for example, say that Kathleen was chosen. She can make her decisions about where she wants to go. We have conference meetings once a month. I think you guys have gatherings routinely, you know, where she feels comfortable, where she feels supported, where she feels she gets her information. So things are offered, and then the pastor priest will be the one to decide what works for them.
I see that it's 10 o'clock, and so I want to see if there's any other non-transitions related questions that we might want to help out. We've had several of those through the morning, but
We've talked them down.
We're extending grace.
grace and balance, thank you.
We're church nerds. We love to talk
But
church.
you also have to do service, so you need a break.
Yes, we are not. Thank you.
Thank you.
Good one.
Thank you, William, for being here today, for sharing what the process is. I think that it answered some questions, hopefully. If y'all have more questions at some point, you can give them to me, give them to Amanda. We might be able to answer them for you, and if not, we will refer those questions to these 2 folks. And we'll go from there. So thank you so much for being there. Thank you all for being here today. Many of you were at the 8 o'clock service and came right upstairs, and some of you are going to stick around for the 10:30 service, and I'm thankful that you came early. So thank you all so much. Excellent.